Welcome to Self-Helpful. I'm your guide, Kevin Miller, and I curate the sea of new personal development messages to bring the most influential leaders onto this show. Join me as I question my guests to better understand their counsel so we can all integrate the wisdom into our lives, because we all want to elevate our own experience and improve the way we show up for others. The Self-Helpful Podcast is presented by Ziglar, your premier source for equipping coaches. Visit Ziglar.com. Hello, Self-Helpful listeners. In this episode, we start a series on emotional intelligence and how to succeed by becoming radically self-aware. Our world applauds people with a high IQ, and yet someone having a high IQ has zero value to me personally. It may have no value for that person or for anyone. It merely says they have the possibility of capacity. It doesn't mean they can or will do anything worthwhile with it. And even if they are brilliant and figure out how to live on Mars or something, they may be miserable and make everyone else miserable. So what is a better measuring stick for overall potential than IQ? And I submit to you, it's EQ, emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence. My guest today is an expert in this and cites that emotional intelligence is the single biggest predictor of our personal and professional success. Scott Allender is an expert in global leadership and organizational development. Along with co-hosting the Evolving Leader podcast, he regularly teaches Enneagram workshops and conducts typing interviews and emotional intelligence assessments for individuals and teams who seek to become more radically self-aware and cognizant of the impact they have on the world. His new book is titled The Enneagram of Emotional Intelligence, A Journey to Personal and Professional Success. And let me be candid here and offer to you my inspiration for this show is my own journey of becoming much more emotionally intelligent. In the past, I thought I was, as most emotionally unintelligent people do. I let some things that I was good at, like controlling my emotional expression and my social awareness, trick me into thinking I was emotionally intelligent. And the truth that finally reared its ugly head was that I was very emotionally unintelligent. So join me as we change some paradigms and give some hope to what you can become. You can also watch this full episode on YouTube if you would like. Just search for Self-Helpful with Kevin Miller. Scott, coming into this issue of emotional intelligence, I'm sure a lot of people, I think about emotional quotient and think about IQ. And I found myself talking literally this morning with a group of folks that I facilitate talking about IQ and kind of poking at it going, I don't know that I've seen that it really pays off a whole lot. You got a high IQ. It doesn't mean much to me. However, your emotional intelligence, that's where I see pay dirt. So this is of big importance to me. I appreciate the focus and just grateful you're here today with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, on that, I started looking and thinking, what do we value? What am I drawn towards? Literally, am I drawn towards somebody with an IQ of 140? It really has no relevance. So they are smart on one topic maybe, but they may be totally socially inept and incredibly unhappy. It really doesn't mean anything. But now over here, I'm really interested in emotional intelligence. And I was even thinking about the types of qualities that I appreciate in others and really want for myself. Even I wrote down, intuition, insight, even like street smarts. And somebody this morning said, just common sense, man. I've known some people incredibly, they got a 1,500 on the SAT or whatever, but they got the common sense of a grapefruit. And so this feels like, this is what really matters. And you talk about that this is really where you see, emotional intelligence is where you see, you cite it as if not the primary predictor of success. Yes?
Yes. It's, you can look at stats across the board and, if you take the average, it's somewhere between 70 to 75% of the reason for your personal success and professional success will be directly linked to your emotional intelligence. And so it's been studied, over and over, report after report. All the data seems to be consistent and pointing to that thing. Now, on the flip side of that, the cornerstone of emotional intelligence being self-awareness, the data on that isn't so great, which was part of my motivation for doing this work and doing this book, is because, as an emotional intelligence coach, I was working with people and not seeing the kinds of changes and shifts that they wanted or that I wanted for them. And I thought, well, maybe I'm just not very good at this. But then I'd look at the research and I'd look at what it's all pointing towards. And it seems like we have an awareness problem. So we know emotional intelligence is far more important, as you're saying, than IQ in terms of effectiveness and even your personal well-being and happiness. And yet the cornerstone of such, it just seems to be really lacking. There was a book that came out a few years back, and it cited a big research study, extensive research study, that suggested only somewhere between 10 to 15% of people are truly self-aware. And what was really interesting about that for me is that the more self-aware somebody thinks they are, the opposite is likely to be true.
Interesting.
So that's a major delta, right? Sort of 70% of the reasons that we're successful are related to our emotional intelligence. We know the cornerstone is awareness, and yet the research suggesting we're lacking in awareness. And that became my fodder for writing this book.
Well, I mean, to some degree, you could say that. I mean, gosh, this show is called the Self-Helpful Show, and we're hitting all these big areas of personal development, self-improvement, whatnot, and that. Oh man, that's daunting. How we can have knowledge, and not do a thing with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it bothers me. I've said this way too many times since I wrote my book. At some point, I'm writing along, I'm going, son of a gun, man. I'm just pulling stuff out of, not out of thin air. I'm pulling it out of my brain. I got a lot of knowledge, and also, holy smokes, done nothing with it. Nothing with it. And so moving from that, and I was trying to find it in my notes, and I literally just am missing it, because you said something in the book about the difference of it was something to the effect of being aware or having awareness is different from really becoming aware of yourself. Do you remember what that? I was trying to find the exact statement.
Well, I don't. I actually can't quote myself here, but it's something in the space of becoming aware of.
I just found it. Being made aware isn't becoming aware. That's what you wrote. Okay.
There you go.
Being made aware isn't becoming aware. Thank you. I felt like that was like the big, ding, 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 ding. That's what we're talking about here. And so as we are here, we get this great knowledge, and that's great. That's a step. Being made aware, like, oh, okay, I got it. So today people are going to hear so many things, and they're going to go, oh, that resonates. So they have been made aware. Now, becoming aware is a whole different thing. And I appreciate you being upfront and honest and saying, here I am teaching emotional intelligence, and yet is the awareness actually helping people? So unpack that a little bit more, because of course you believe that, it can, but it doesn't by proxy mean it will. So play with that.
Yeah. So usually what happens in these, when you have this emotional intelligence conversation, my criticism of it is that far too much of the systems themselves and the conversations that follow are far too rational and logical, and they bypass the emotional experience itself. So we're having conversations about emotional intelligence and awareness, but we're doing it from far too much of a heady, rational, logistical place. And that's where that knowledge sits, right? It's like, information, right? As opposed to the practice of developing awareness, which is to learn, in this case for emotional intelligence, to experience your actual emotions, to take the time to actually feel them, and then become curious about what information those emotions are giving to you. Because our emotions exist for a reason. They're there because they give us knowledge and insights that we can't get from anywhere else. Yet in most of life, and even in these frameworks, a lot of times we bypass that part, and people want to move quickly to emotional regulation, which really just kind of means you're too much when you're really intense, or that feeling's too big and it might get in your way. And that might be true. So the idea is, let me learn where I'm doing that, how it's affecting people in my life or the people I lead, And then with this knowledge, let me try to, with sheer white knuckle determination, make these behavioral changes.
Right.
And that's never sticky. That's never going to last. Because what you have to get to is underneath the waterline of consciousness to find out, why do I have these big emotional reactions that may not be serving me? What's underneath that? What are my core fears, desires, wounds? What is all under there that's making up the personality, the construct that leads to these behaviors that may or may not be healthy or productive? If you think about it as an iceberg model, behaviors are the little bits of piece of the ice that you see that sits above the waterline. And these conversations and the knowledge and the research, they all sit mostly around that, right? Because that's the visual part. But that big, giant glacier, that big iceberg underneath is where all this other stuff is. And it requires a journey into that and having to sort of learn to question and face the stories that shape the behaviors. And that's the journey of becoming aware. And there's a lot of practices, and I lay them out in the book about what you can do to kind of build the muscle and learn to sort of self-observe and self-reflect in real time. But I think that's the disconnect. That's the delta, right? We and businesses and leadership, they don't, there's not a lot of space for that, right? Because businesses and they don't really buy into emotional intelligence. They buy into what you get on the end of emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Like, we want leaders that act and behave a certain way, and that makes sense. That they're in business doing whatever it is they do, and they want leaders to act and be a certain way. And if they're not able to, they might bring somebody in to say, help us do that. And then you use systems like emotional intelligence where, you do the inventory, you give them the report, you kind of talk with them, and hopefully you see some changes. But again, going back to my opening remarks, I don't see a lot of lasting changes until people are able and willing to go into themselves to discover the things that they've put away into the shadows of their awareness, the things they don't see, the things they don't see, the things they don't want to necessarily see. And when people do that, though, when they have the courage to do that, then you start to see transformational change.
Okay, I want to unpack something that you referenced in regards to emotional intelligence as a predictor of success. Of saying, gosh, when you do the surveys, you find the most successful people have great emotional intelligence. And I feel like to say that, we got to unpack what success we're talking about. Is it the success of an achievement, or is it the overall success? Because I'm thinking when you say that, I'm resonating, going, yeah, those are the people in my life that I am drawn to, that have joy, that have peace, that have faith, that have a magnetic personality, that lift me up, that inspire me, that, as opposed to, because if we go over to the culture right now and what we're all applauding, the next, athletic, superstar, or the celebrity, or the next billionaire, or whatever, we see a lot of those who have the emotional intelligence of a hand grenade, and they're suffering from it. And we read about it on the tabloids and stuff. Now, they did put some stuff together in one area of life to have great success on stage, on the field, in business, in politics, or whatever. And of course, we applaud that, and we almost expect these cataclysmic circumstances in the rest of their life. So I feel like, for people to listen to this and go, okay, well, we're talking about success from emotional intelligence. But if you're applauding over here and your goal is to, be a rock star, no matter the cost, totally different game we're talking about.
Totally different game.
Totally different. Yeah. So over here on I want to be a quality human with few regrets at the end of my life, and so much gratitude and testimony and relationship from people. If I want that, now we're over here in the emotional intelligence category. Am I tracking?
Yeah, completely.
Okay.
I struggled with the subtitle of the book because I wanted something that would convey what I'm after, and I don't know as though it did. But the idea is the journey towards both personal and professional success. That's for me.
Fair, yeah.
It's the intersection of both. It's not professional success at the expense of one's own authentic experience or well-being. It's when all of it becomes integrated, right? Because as you point out, and there's the Enneagram points to this as well. There are certain types on the Enneagram, personality types, who tend towards having really great success and they keep getting the applause and they keep getting the accolades and they keep performing and keep achieving and keep climbing the ladder. And they wake up in the ER one day with, cardiac issues and, all sorts of things that could happen because it wasn't being lived out of an authentic place.
Yeah.
So I think that there's an opportunity here for us to integrate all parts of ourselves. And then the kind of successes that we have are richer and deeper and more real to who we are and what we really want. They're not lived. Some of what you're talking about is when we live life on the surface of our own existence. It's this culture informed or sort of external pressure informed way of being where we learn to play the game, we learn to, master the chessboard, but we do so at the expense of our own well-being. And that's absolutely not what we're after.
We had Terry Real on the show. His book is called Us. He's got multiple books. He's famous as being Gwyneth Paltrow's family or relationship therapist. And he showcased a story that resonated with me, Scott. And it was, this guy going along, realizing that out there in the world, doing his thing, he's kind of good. He's kind of good. I mean, he's good with the results. He's good with his style, whatever. But if he wants relationship over here, it's a different deal. And I resonated because I kind of feel like that. Here in my work, as a pro athlete, going and doing my thing, even amongst, friends, going having adventures and stuff, I'm kind of good. I don't really care to spend time digging into all this stuff, getting in touch with my emotions. However, if I do want relationship with my spouse, if I want a deeper relationship with friends, if I want to connect with my kids, I need to do some work. And of course I do want to do those. And I want to point to, you said something a minute ago about on the being aware, being made aware and then actually becoming aware. And you mentioned experience. That one sticks out to me. Well, okay. So for candor, I'm a 7.
Okay.
And I'm sitting here studying your book, so I'm in my head and I'm going to think. I'm not going to feel, I'm going to think. And so when we have something like thinking about gratitude every day, right? It's a think gratitude. It's easy, man. I can do that. Well, we just had a guy on, Jake Eagle, on the show. His book's The Power of All, and it's microdosing mindfulness. And he's saying, in essence, no, stop. Don't just think. You can think gratitude and that's easy. I want you to stop for a second and feel awe. We'd experience awe. Dude, that's a whole different ballgame, especially for somebody like me. So it's really changed my paradigm of helped me start becoming a feeler as opposed to a thinker. So there's some awareness that I have, Scott, that I've been made aware, and I'm actually making some progress on becoming aware.
I love that. Could you tell me more about what that's done for you? Like, how is that changing your lived experience and your work? How is that helping you show up to your work and to your family and to your friends differently as you allow that to be more of a felt experience instead of what, as you say, 7s tend to do is have a very heady experience with it?
It's given me peace. It's getting me out of again, man, I'm reading your book and I'm reading the unhealthy and the healthy, and I'm starting to experience the healthy. So I can go and look, that's my nature, is an unhealthy response and a running from the fear. And that conflict just wrecks me and I can't sleep. That's it. Yeah. I have a conflict, with my wife, about some issue, and I'm wrecked. I can't sleep, which it makes no sense. Because I'm wondering, what am I so afraid of? What's the She's not going to stab me in my sleep? I don't really what on earth is going on here? Why is this bothering me? And I shared this. I didn't share it publicly like this, but, had a little conflict last week. And I wouldn't even say that we necessarily resolved it, but we had the conflict. It's like, okay, a kid came in and interrupted and whatever, and you go on with life. And then I went to bed and went to sleep. Like, man, that's progress. That's that piece of. And it was from understanding, having the awareness, sitting out on the table and going, okay, normal me is so wrapped up in that for no reason, and just kind of putting two to two together, doing some box breathing, and then going, okay. And then now we're back to the title of your book, Success in my, not professional life, but here, my personal life, in my I mean, in my spirit, in my soul is really where I think to, Scott.
And then I'm guessing if you're like others who I've spoken to of various types who've had their own version of what you're talking about, it makes everything more enriched. So your professional success actually becomes more enriched because of the peace, for example, that you're talking about in your personal life, right? There's not that juxtaposition where you're having this externally successful experience, but underneath is all this undealt with fear that's shaping all sorts of outcomes that you might not want and disrupting your sleep and all the things you're mentioning.
Yeah.
It starts to bring it all together. And that's kind of what I want to point towards, is that you don't have to choose, right? There's not a binary. I think it used to be kind of that way, and it still permeates some organizational cultures where it's like, oh, hey, leave your feelings at the door and put on your professionalness, and you have to live this compartmentalized life that pits one important thing against another. It's just not true, and it's not helpful.
Yeah.
In fact, we actually learned that when people get more connected to what they're feeling at work and they have a space where they can say it and articulate it, it actually frees up their capacity for more clear thinking, and they actually make better decisions and have better productivity throughout the day, as opposed to organizational cultures that still want you to compartmentalize and say, no, we just want the professional Kevin over here, right? Leave all that other stuff behind. And you end up with this disintegrated existence where you don't bring your whole self to work. And then it starts to fragment everything, right? And you go home and it's fragmented, but when you can do all of it together, your successes become more successful, they become more enriched, they become more rewarding, and you have more peace. And that's the point. That's the why.
It's interesting you say that, because I upheld the ability to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
I applauded that in myself and in others, the ability to do that. And granted, there's a time to do that. It's the consummate ship captain, and the boat's about to go under, and he's the one keeping his cool while everybody's freaking out. Okay, kudos to him. It's great. It's kind of, I keep coming back, Scott, to I just did we did a series on men and some deep issues there, and I thought, man, that stuff is great on the battlefield. It's awesome on the playing field. It was great for me as a pro cyclist out in the road, to compartmentalize, shelf that stuff, and give a zillion % and just go at this one compartmentalized venture. That's not real life. It's not, and like you said, it's not even business. I took that into business, and I hurt relationships. I took people for granted. I ignored people in my life, and it didn't work there. But you're right, man, to compartmentalize. And I would say that if you're in the military and you're on the battlefield, there's a place for that. And if you're a pro athlete, there's a place for that. And maybe sometimes in business, but man, my wife doesn't want that. My kids don't want it. My friends don't want it. My audience here doesn't want that. They want the full, they want to hear everything. That's a hard lesson to learn, when again, you get so much applause. We're back to the success. You get the applause for the big achievement, even with the collateral damage. Yeah, that's the exception.
Well, but even when you stay focused, even if you're if somebody's listening going, well, I'm just really still focused on the external, I'm climbing the ladder, I want the external, I would still argue the best way you're going to get there is by resourcing the internal world. You want to develop your external world, you want to put the points on the board, develop your internal world. Yeah. Right? Resource that. Get connected with your emotions. Learn to understand, as I unpack in the book, it's called emotional intelligence, but so much of what informs our emotions is our ability to reconnect even with what our bodies are telling us. So there's this journey that I lay out around the quality of our thoughts, right? Paying attention, our metacognition, learning to understand the beliefs we hold and the frames we hold up to ourselves and others, learning to access and metabolize our emotions, and learning to connect to and understand our bodily signals. So there's these sort of 3 dimensions that all inform our interior world. And when we're able to integrate those and understand those and develop skills and being able to know what those signals mean and those thoughts mean and those feelings mean, it actually I think, and what I've observed is that it actually catapults people to even greater external success. So whether you're motivated because you're like, wow, I'm feeling disintegrated and I'm feeling like I'm putting points on the board, but my personal life's not where I want it to be, that's a great motivation. And even if you're not there and you're like, well, I think I'm okay in my personal life, and I just want to focus on external, I would still. They both matter. You have to resource your internal world for your external world to be even sustainable.
Yes. And it's interesting that you keep saying that if somebody was to decide, no, I just want to focus on the external. I mean, there can be a time for that, a season and a cycle. There have been times in my life, even, gosh, when we built a house 15 years ago, and I mean, we built it. So I did the general contracting, a lot of the labor and stuff. So I abandoned my family for 9 months to a degree. And I was just external focused with an end in sight, knowing that this can't go on further. With the end in sight, you get your certificate of occupancy, you move in, and now boom, we're all together in the big house. So for a season, to achieve something, but even then to be aware of it, which we were really cognizant of it. You said our bodies telling us, you mentioned that. I wanted to pull that out because for my listeners, they will not long ago have heard a series that we did on anxiety. I brought in Britt Frank. Her book is The Science of Stuck, and her focus on the body's response. Well, I would just say, to go deep, go listen to that, folks, because that's one.
I did listen to that one. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've been made aware, Scott. I'm really struggling with that one of becoming aware, of taking into account, of stopping in the moment and not just, for me, medicating. I'm a 7. So I'm just, let me just go find something fun, man. Put music on. Let's get some food. Let's go for a run, go for a ride or whatever, as opposed to my therapist saying, no, sit in it, Kevin, sit in it, feel it. So I'm struggling with that one, but I want to acknowledge you repeating yourself, on this again. Our bodies are telling us that, and then back to that experiential aspect. It's something I wanted to ask you. As I read your book, it just again came up how difficult it is. Well, like you said, most of us, we think we know ourselves, and the research shows that we don't. And yet we're so often cognizant of other people. For some reason, it was helping me to think about that. Like if I started thinking about people in my life, you see their stuff and you think, oh yeah, John is really, optimistic, enthusiastic. And, Sam is, man, he's just kind of a sad, negative guy, this demeanor. And Susie is, confident, and somebody's insecure, and somebody's happy, and somebody's sad. And we see other people so well, and we don't see ourselves. And this is a true story. I was with a guy last week who changed his name. I won't use the real name, but it was in essence like saying it used to be Dan. Now it's Danny. And I heard about that. I was like, dude, tell me about that. And he says, I realized I had some other people, my wife saying she was going to divorce me, some of my business partners saying they were going to quit doing business with me, not because I was incompetent here or there, whatever, but just because of the person I was an a-hole. And I didn't know it. And it was just so amazing hearing him say that here he is, competent, married, has a good job or business or whatever. But then it actually took him running aground on those to be open to hear himself. And he actually went and changed his name to a more playful name. He says, I wanted to change the essence of who I am. I thought that was a rock star story. Yeah. But again, back to us, you just showcased that so much in your book and in the research of how we really do think we know each other, or know ourselves. I'm sorry, know ourselves, and yet we really don't. And that's just, I don't think any of us want to hear that.
No,
but that's what that's what you see time and time again.
Yeah. Well, a couple of many reasons for that. You mentioned how we see other people. Again, I'll go back to the iceberg model. You see that little tip of the ice bouncing above the water, and that's all you see of your friends and your colleagues, and you don't see the whole storyline and all the stuff underneath. Similarly, most of us just get so automated, right? Life becomes habitual. Part of what mindfulness work teaches you, and it's so difficult to do, right? I practice it. I try to do 10 minutes a day of meditative focus on my breathing. And if I'm honest, there's times where I'm like, am I ever going to get good at this because as a 3, I'm also very like you as a 7, very future focused, difficult to sit still for long periods of time. The discipline has been important for me though. But just staying focused on my breath and what that feels like and just directing that attention takes a lot of discipline and a lot of practice. And there's a bunch of reasons why it's important to maybe bring that into your lived experience as a practice for developing awareness. But it's also illustrative because it just shows you that we have a tough time directing our attention and paying attention to what we're paying attention to. And so much of our conditioning, these sort of personality types that the Enneagram points to, these sort of 9 archetypes of ego, they get these habitual patterns of directing our attention to the thing that was most useful for us to pay attention to as young people, because this is how we were going to navigate our stories, get our needs met, find love, have security. And it worked for us. And these personalities get stronger and stronger and stronger, and they end up masking the essence of who we are. So part of the journey of the Enneagram, it's a typology system, and most people, when they dabble with it, learn enough to sort of understand basic type descriptions about their type, and that's it. And that's fine. But what it's really intended for is a map for how to move beyond the limitations of your type. So you understand your type where as a point on the Enneagram system where you got stuck and where you now only react out of that type, right? Like as a 3, my automatic focus of attention is, what does success look like in this room? What do these people value? And then unconsciously, how do I adapt and shift to become the best representation of what success looks like in that room? And that becomes my whole world. And I ignore and just don't even realize it's there, that I contain all these other types and all this other truth that I have buried below the surface of my awareness because my lived experience told me that it wasn't going to be okay to be that. So my internalized childhood wound is that my own identity and my own emotions don't really matter. It's what you do for other people. It's it's how you perform. It's what you can give to others. And I started, every time I got, a round of applause or an attaboy, that just reinformed that that's what my life, all unconsciously, but this is who I was becoming. This is how I was going to live. And so the reason we don't know ourselves ultimately is that I buried all this stuff. I buried who I really was. I buried my own emotional experience. Part of my waking up and doing this work is, I start the book with this, is that, I'm here as an emotional intelligence coach, working with teams, working with leaders, helping them try to build more awareness. This is the whole becoming aware versus.
Yeah.
And, I left a meeting and I get on the interstate, and completely out of the blue, I end up having this like cardiac experience. I think my heart's beating erratically. I'm like flushed. I feel like I'm going to pass out. And I pull off the interstate. I dial 911. Long story short, I had this anxiety attack, and I'd never had one before. And part of my journey of really getting in touch with who I am underneath the surface level of my personality was to learn to understand everything I just talked about, that I lived my life pushing my own emotional experience out of my field of consciousness, kind of disconnected from my truest identity because I was always sort of unconsciously adapting to the expectations of the people in my life. And one day my body sounded an alarm and just came screaming out at me and calling for me to wake up, right? And that became when I went deep into this system. So not everybody will have an anxiety attack, thankfully. But what the Enneagram reveals in summary really is to say, we're all kind of wearing these masks of personality to protect the parts of ourselves that we didn't feel were safe to be. And we need to understand the ways that we did that, the way that Enneagram strategy presented itself, so that we can start to go on this journey of recovering these lost parts of ourselves.
Well, thank you for sharing that. A couple things on that. I mean, you talked about, and like that, not everybody may have an anxiety attack. I go, yeah, but they may be depressed. They may fall into apathy, bitterness, rage. For me, okay, so as a 7, this makes sense. I'm just going to flee. I'm out. I'm going to fly. I'm going to go flight to just get away from the negativity, get away from what I can't handle, what feels overwhelming, and I'm going to withdraw. That's where so to each his own, and none of us want any of those manifestations. There is a piece though I want you to reconcile a little bit, Scott, because you're saying, okay, in essence, you take the Enneagram and you find out, like me, I do it, and man, I'm a 7. I was a little unsure of it, and I did this show with Ian Morgan Cronin. He's like, "No, dude, you're a 7, straight up." So, so great. So now I'm aware of what I am. But you said the word of we can know what it is. And a second ago, you use the word truest identity. Know our truest identity. Know who we are. But then you also said to move beyond that. Play with that, because now I've been studying this stuff, and I can reconcile that. But I don't know that everybody can, because that can sound like, okay, so I'm going to try to find who I am naturally, but not be that. That feels inauthentic, or that feels like a performance. So reconcile that so nobody gets hung up there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that in some ways, and again, very unconsciously, our Enneagram type, our personality of Enneagram type, meaning what I mean by that is the typology, the sort of type descriptions, that is the performative part in many ways, right? That's the adapted self. So it's not about learning to not be that. It's learning that what we're being isn't really our truest selves. And this is why it's so difficult to get to know ourselves and make any sustainable change when it comes to emotional intelligence. Because if I sit with you and I point out all these sort of typical patterns of behaviors and focuses of attention that a type 7 has, you say, great. Now you try to turn down and adjust the things that I'm saying might be working against you, or that you identify may work against you.
Yeah.
But that goes back to our earlier part of the conversation where we say that becomes sort of inauthentic white knuckle change, going, okay, I need to do less of this because it irritates this person, or, this is how it's working against me. Ultimately, the depth of work that the Enneagram calls us to focus on is to rediscover the ways that all of this 7-ishness in you is actually hiding the truest parts of Kevin, right? So you have, as a 7, you have this core motivation, a drive to experience all possibilities, to be stimulated and content, and to avoid any limitations, right? Which can lead to, a lot of superpower around being future focused and optimistic, being, inspiring and passionate and fun. The wounding message for that type is often something in the space of, it's not okay to really depend on anyone. And I need to stay one step ahead of any limitations that may, if I let, or any sadness or suffering in my life, because if I let that into my lived experience, it may never leave me. Now, that's an unconscious fear.
Yeah.
And so all of this great stuff that you get cheered on and has helped make you so successful, it's part of who you are, but it's not all of who you are, because the all of who you are contains the part of yourself that you're protecting, that your personality and your ego was developed to protect. And so when you do work, when I see 7s do really, really great inner work, they slow down enough to let a little more sadness into their experience when it's there, let a little more suffering into their lives when it rises, instead of reframing it or trying to outrun or outfun it. And then they learn it's not forever, right? And actually, I have a greater depth of experience now that I allow all my emotions into my consciousness, as opposed to the default tendency of the personality type 7, which is I only want the fun and enthusiastic and optimistic emotions into my experience, and I'm going to push all the other ones out. So it is by no means learning to become something you're not. It's learning to unbecome some of what you're not, so that you can become more of who you really are.
Well, thank you for that. And man, I will say, in shameless promotion, just in guidance, if I'm the self-help guide here, guys, go get the book. go get Scott's book. I'm enthralled by the chapters that go. I've got them all numbered here for my 7, where you go through. Okay, and in this area, this is how you react or respond in unhealth and ill health. Mm-hmm. Here's how you respond in health, and it so resonates, and it so gives me a becoming path. I would say. So here's where you are in unhealth, with which I understand. I've either been there, or I am, or I revert back to in the weak moments. And here I am there, because to outrun and outfun the bad emotion, that has been me. That has been me. Now, I still am somebody who's drawn. I don't think for the rest of my existence, there will never be a day where I'm not looking forward to dinner. I love dinner, and there's going to be music and candles and wine, and I want everybody to join. And that's just me. That's not going to change. But, and my gosh, the last 2 weeks, talk about mountaintop experiences. I've literally been on top of mountains above tree line, and I've been paddleboarding, I've been rafting, I've been biking, I've been hiking, I've been just having a blast. That's me. Now, if I am doing that, running away from, and I can't come back to where I am now or at home, then I guess that would be the telltale sign. So it's really, a lot of it you're talking about the emotion. So at the end of the day, Kevin, how did that feel? How do you feel? Do I feel satisfied? Do I feel fulfilled? Or do I feel, what would you say, anxious, worn out? Because I think anxiety is probably my red flag. That even though that seems like that should have been good, it wasn't a worse thing. But my anxiety, which now I've got wearable devices that are flat out telling me, dude, you may think you're doing good, but your sleep was wrecked last night. Your anxiety, and I'm going, oh, son of a gun, how is that? And this is, and you know what? Let me take that to come into something that was profound for me regarding your book, Scott. I have always looked at emotional intelligence, just like you say in the beginning of the book, as kind of an outward thing, an extrinsic thing, and like how I read people, how I interact with people, how I behave, you said it too, how I regulate the emotional expression. So I may feel bitter, rage, I may feel whatever, but I'm good. I can perform, I can come in. And I thought of that as emotional intelligence. And you said, and I'm actually going to quote this is page 50 in the book. You said, it's how effective we are at continually accessing, understanding, managing, and leveraging our emotions in our day-to-day relationship with ourselves and others. Now, you do put others on there, but you said ourselves. Well, crap. That's not what I've been doing with emotion, which in my class that I led this morning, I was talking about this leading up to that. I said, I am not, I can't say that, on the spectrum, 1 to 10 of emotional intelligence. I'm really not. I'm getting there. I'm working on it. But that is not a strong suit for me to naturally, as you say, access, understand, manage, and leverage my emotions. That is a weakness. That's like learning a new language, and I have some of the basic word translations down, and that's about it. And I'm growing towards that. But that's like a mic drop statement or perspective or paradigm shift, I should say, from you, is that this is about our emotional intelligence, understanding our own emotions. And I think when that happens, it changes. Well, that just throws a wrench into the wheels of what most people think about as emotional intelligence. And I don't want everybody to be bummed by that, but I guess you would say, no, that's hopeful. So now that
it's super helpful.
Okay. Well, go with that. Yeah.
And I would say, what I hear as you talk is somebody with a high level of awareness, which is you're aware that your struggle is to access and allow into your lived experience the whole totality of your emotions. And so you're on a path to change that, right?
Sure.
So, it's not, when I say high awareness, I don't mean that like you've arrived and that's it. Because I make a point in the book to say there's no, a self-awareness station where it's all done. It's kind of this unending journey of growth. But I say that in contrast to like some opening stats we talked about, which is the more self-aware somebody thinks they are, the opposite is likely to be true. And so when I hear you say, I'm really aware of the deficit and I really understand the need, and I have this felt desire to make a shift, that's when the growth will really happen. That's when you're going to start getting that embodied awareness, because you're going to start paying attention, as I did post my anxiety experience, right? Which is going on a journey where I still am constantly on the journey of learning to access and understand two things that I don't readily want to understand: my emotions and my physical feeling state, my sort of body budget, if you will. That's kind of a constant thing for me. So part of what I did as a 3 is I got a feelings wheel out, and I always reference my feelings wheel, right? I go like try to do a daily, like, what is the most granular I can get with my emotions? I'm going to name it and say it out loud. And then also, what's my physical feeling? And there's a lot of stuff I point out in the book as well, because it's so important and it's an overlooked component of developing awareness. We've talked about it already a bit, but I can't emphasize it enough, which is developing interoceptive awareness, which is really the ability to tune into the signals that our body sends us and how that informs our thinking and our emotional state. And I point to a study that was done in 2011, I think. So it's a bit old, but there's been other studies since. But I found this one to be the most compelling because it has to do with a person's very liberty and freedom, which was, they did a study of judges in Israel and the parole rates of people that came up for parole. And the average across all genders and sort of, crimes and what have you, was around a 66% parole rate that was happening. However, around 10 a.m., when the judge's blood sugar dropped, if they hadn't had a snack, you would see the parole rates of these prisoners drop dramatically.
Wow.
If they had an apple, you see them go right back up to 66%. And I imagine that when that judge was making a decision, I'm sure they felt a certain emotion. They felt they were super clear in their, judiciary sort of rationale about why this prisoner couldn't be set free. But in reality, when they studied this over time, it really had to do with what was going on in their body budget, their physical need. And so this is why that sort of is 1/3 of a puzzle that gets overlooked and is critically important, because we can often conflate our emotional feeling or our rational processing thinking with what's actually just happening in our bodies, right? It's like a Snickers bar commercial, right? It's that whole, you need a Snickers, dude. Like, that's what you need right now, right? But there's ways and methodologies to develop a greater sensitivity and awareness. So part of what I do, and not only with my feelings wheel, is I do other things that help me tune into my heart rate and body scan to understand what am I feeling physically, and bringing all that together that brings a greater level of awareness.
It's so interesting you're talking about the judges and that. I'm here. You can see it in the video. So I'm wearing a continual glucose monitor.
Okay.
Which is from our sponsor, NutriSense, literally. So I'm doing that and I'm going along. I got an app on my phone and looking at it, and you can see when I spike, when I'm low, based on what I eat, when I eat, how often I eat, my physical exertion, and other things. I'm learning that, but yeah, it belies that. So that's interesting to think, I should look at it and go, kids, you know what? Don't ask me that right now. Wait a minute, I need an apple.
You don't want an answer right now.
You don't want an answer. No, we all need that. We need like a constant rating system to measure what's going on. Okay. Speaking of that, measuring, that's a great dive in to your measuring. You have these 5 areas that you talk about: self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationships, decision-making, and stress management. Now, I want everybody to hear those areas, because in the book, as you go through that, you can come to each of those. Well, of course, you got to know what your Enneagram number is. So go do the Enneagram. Where should people take the Enneagram?
I really like cpenneagram.com. They've got a test you can pay for. I think it's like $40. And it's been validated. I use that in my practice, and I've never seen it get anybody wrong. So I'll give the test and then I'll do a typing interview, and the accuracy is really, really good. And the information that it gives you is actually really useful too. So that's the one I like, cpenneagram.com.
cpenneagram.com. Okay, I'm going to go take it there again. I mean, I've taken it recently, but I'm going to go take it there again. So you go there, figure out what you are. Then you take it into Scott's book, and you've got these 5 areas: self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationships, decision-making, and stress management. And you have in there, it's just enthralling for me to read it and to go, okay, Kevin, self-perception. This is how a 7, this is how a 7 in ill health, unawareness. Is that fair to say? Unawareness?
Yeah. Low awareness. Yeah.
Low awareness. This is how you're going to tend to respond. And I look at it and I resonate with all of those things. Even if I have become aware and am moving past those, again, they're always going to be there. They're always going to be a propensity. It's always going to be, that's where I'm going to fall back if I'm weak.
Totally.
And it's incredible. To me, it's really hopeful because it's saying, okay, this makes sense. Somebody gets me. They've been watching the videotape of my life. And then here's the goal. Here's the payoff. My gosh, that's what we all want. I mean, I should really have that at the top of every show. Today, we're talking about X, and the hoped payoff is X. And you give that in, like self-perception. For me, a 7, I have a fear of being trapped in pain. That's my natural propensity, is to respond to any conflict, any relational strife, any whatever pressure, financial pressure or job work, whatever. And I'm going to fear being trapped in pain, and I'm going to run. And then, and I didn't write this one down, so I can't even say it unless you can, but in health though, I would not. Now I may still have that feeling, but I've now become aware. And I can, and that's where you're saying that's the hope of being aware, so that I can move beyond that reaction and choose to respond and maybe even feel in a different way. How am I doing?
Yeah, you're doing good. So each Enneagram type in low awareness. So I look at those 5 scales you mentioned. That's the sort of 5 scales I use in my emotional intelligence coaching. And I look at, as you say, each type and what they look like in high awareness and low awareness. Yeah. And low awareness is when we are at, and this might be too much masterclass for this show, so you can stop me if you want to, but in low awareness, we end up living out of something called the emotional vice of our type, or the passion of our type. Now, this passion isn't something that you're passionate about, like, oh, I'm passionate about cycling, or I'm passionate about dinner with my family. This is like, think of it as like a crime of passion. It's the overtaking, all-consuming emotional experience that feeds this sort of fear, and the fear feeds it. So you've got this fear of being trapped in pain or deprived or limited. And it leads to this dominant emotional experience when you're in low awareness and you're sort of crux of your personality, if you will, the ego, of a passion called gluttony for a 7.
I was going to go there, dude. That so tracks my life. I mean, that's it. I don't want to be in pain. So I'm going to, again, music, food, sex, alcohol, exercise, whatever. And I'm going to do it big. Yeah.
Yeah. And gluttony in its true definition from an Enneagram perspective is wanting a little bit of all possibilities, right? Like I want to keep all my options open, and I want to try and have access to a little bit of everything.
Anything to be unconfined, not trapped.
Right.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, you see yourself as not being able to, you want to see yourself as just being super fun and super optimistic, and, reframing because that's what people like. And, you see yourself all well-intentioned, unaware that what's underneath and driving that self-perception is all this stuff that's around the fear of being trapped in pain. And it's feeding the vice of gluttony. And it looks like, going back to the iceberg model, that little tip of behavior looks like, wow, Kevin's a lot of fun, and it's really great. He's up for anything, and he'll do anything, and he just, it's awesome, right? And that's good, and that's part of who you are. But underneath the waterline of consciousness is all that stuff we've been talking about. Now, when you get to high awareness, when you do the inner work and come face to face with the stories that are behind these fears and the sort of wounds and all the things that we need to work on, you actually return to the virtue of your type, which is the highest and truest expression, the Kevin you were before life told you who you needed to become. And for you, it's sobriety.
Yeah.
It's the complete opposite of the grip of the passion of the type. And each of the 9 types have that exact experience, right? When we're in our most ego, sort of unaware autopilot expression, it's the vice of our type that's running the show. And when we do the work, and that's all described in the low awareness sections, and then when we do the work of awakening to that, we return to the virtue of our type, which is always the opposite of the passion. Now, you might be listening and saying, why do I care? Why should I care? I would say is because the passion of your type is the source of all your suffering, or your primary suffering. It's the primary reason why, when you feel like life isn't working and relationships aren't working, and you look in the rearview mirror and you see the fender benders, or all the sort of debris that you don't want to see, it is often rooted in this unawareness of the emotional vice, the passion of our type, that's running the show, and we don't even know it.
Let me ask you, let me dig into some of that right there. So my tendency to outrun, outfun the pain, with my natural propensity to celebrate. I mean, that's also who I am. So that's not a bad thing. But if I'm using that and running from it, here's something that happened, and I'm curious. Well, I think happened, if I understand it correctly, and I'm curious your take on it. Because of so many years of trying to outrun and outfun anything that was painful. And it's not like I had a tragic life, but just my own inner turmoil and inauthenticity, being inauthentic, my false self, as you would say. From the years of that, and being the guy who's always leading the group and sparking the social occasion and having the dinner parties at the house and whatever, I burned out. I came to an end, and I burned out so bad that for a while, I went the opposite way. And I'm out. I'm not the guy who's up for anything now. I'm just out. I just retreated. And that feels like a danger to me, to take this thing. So here's your glory, but if you do it in an unhealthy way, you may actually burn out and realize that, gosh, because I'm wondering, is somebody else going to take the Enneagram and go, gosh, okay, that's who I understand that, but I'm not that person anymore, or I don't have those tendencies as much, maybe because I did them so poorly and unhealthily, I burned out of those. Have you seen that happen? Oh yeah.
I mean, in the Enneagram system itself, well, 2 things I'll say. One, lest anybody's listening going, but I don't want to lose my superpower of being the life of the party, as I said.
Yeah.
You won't lose your superpower. That's not going away, right?
You may wound it for a while.
Well, if you overdo it, coming to what you just said, your experience was, there's where that strategy no longer works for you and you sort of implode. That's what you want to stay away from, and that's part of the reason why you want to wake up to what the reality of what's going on.
Okay.
But your skills in that, like I always try to tell people, like, when I work with 3s, I was like, you're not going to stop being a good CEO. In fact, you'll become a better CEO, like by understanding what's going on, right? You're not going to lose that. Because the Enneagram's not concerned with change, like focusing on what you do, but it's why we do it, right? It's all about the why, right? So why were you outfunning and outrunning? And when you're not connected to the why, you're in dangerous territory, because one day you will hit a wall, right? One day that strategy just won't work for you, right? I would say my experience driving 70 miles an hour in the car was my moment of my strategy no longer working for me, right?
Yeah.
And what the Enneagram also shows to us is the way we're all interconnected. And there's these lines, right? So you've got the number to the right and the left of your type, which is your wings. And we tend to overlean on one wing over another as a way to get our needs met. Ultimately, the wings are there as a growth strategy for helping us create more balance in our lives. You've also got each type has an arrow line, and it connects to a different type. And again, the arrow lines, like the wings, are there for growth, but they also can point us to where we might tend to go like what you're talking about, when we're in prolonged stress and when things are starting to collapse around us. So for example, as a 3, I'll just speak from my own lived experience. I'm connected to 9 and 6. My tendency, this isn't always the case, but my tendency, and the tendency for many 3s, when the strategy for go, because 3s are motivated by a need to be successful at all costs, avoid failure at all costs, or at least appear successful and appear to avoid failure. And they will chase success because their greatest fear is that they have no worth separate from what they accomplish, right? So they go. But it's not uncommon for a 3 to suddenly look like a really unhealthy 9, like they slide unconsciously to the arrow line to 9 and take on all these sloth-like experiences and behaviors. I'll tell you, honestly, I could say during moments during COVID, during when that first happened and lockdown and we're at home for a long, long time, I definitely found myself many times sort of looking like an unhealthy 9. So to answer your question, yeah, for each of the 9 types, we might start taking on unhealthy characteristics of one of the other types when our strategy for getting our needs met at our Enneagram type point no longer works. It's not uncommon at all.
It's interesting. It wouldn't be surprised. It obviously makes sense as a 7 that I have in the past struggled with personality profiles per se, because I didn't want to be limited by them. I don't want a label. I don't want I don't want an ADHD diagnosis. I don't want autism spectrum diagnosis. I don't want whatever. And yet, and so if anybody's hearing that, I want them to hear. I mean, you are talking about these are your propensities. These are your predispositions. And we just did a series, actually it's running right now, on perception style, that we have an inherent way that we perceive life, and that it is, and the researcher on this, Linda Ross Vega, is saying that it is. I mean, it's there now, but like you said, we want to be able to move beyond that or not be owned by that. Another piece is talking about the profiles, though, and you talk about this, is that we are self-reporting. So if people go to cpenneagram.com and take it, you are self-reporting. I have not done this, but I have thought about it, and I'm interested in your perspective on, would it have value to have my wife take it for me, my kids take it for me, my best friend take it for me, or does that not resonate either?
Well, the problem with that's a great question. And 360s are very useful with a lot of different tools. I would say from an Enneagram perspective, it may get you wrong because there are a lot of lookalike types based on behavior. And so if they're assessing you based on how they experience you, that is not getting at what the Enneagram wants to get to, which is why do you do this, right? So you could end up with, for example, 7s, 3s, and 8s share a tremendous amount of common ground in terms of their behavior tendencies, right? All tend to be very future focused, tend to be quite assertive, right? Tend to avoid or push out of awareness their own emotional experience, or only focus on super positive, or not even positive, but high energy emotions, and direct them very outward. So you could end up, if somebody took the test for you, they could say, I see a lot of these behaviors, and you might end up with, Kevin's an 8 or Kevin's a 3. But what's motivating you is the motivation from type 7, that core fear, that core sort of desire that's driving all of it.
Keep on.
The main thing to point out to anybody who may go on and take the test is, think across your whole lived experience when you answer the questions. Answer them is not as you want to be, but as you are, right? With all sort of sincerity. Don't try to gamify anything. Just be as genuine as you possibly can to get to an actual result that's meaningful. If you get your type wrong because you game it, then you get nothing out of it.
On the felt of the feeling, the emotion on that, I find myself lately interested in the word or the concept of threat. What is the threat? What is it? You've used the word fear a lot. And in regards to myself, I found myself questioning, with that negative response, with that, with that fear even, like I talked about earlier, wondering why, what is the threat at the end of this story? I don't have a testimony of, I did X, Y, Z and was literally, physically abused or mugged or got a dire illness or was, incapacitated or even confined, like we're talking about. So I have a fear of being confined because it was because my parents, kept me chained up in the cellar. No, I was given, I look back and wonder if I was given too many freedoms, and yet my propensity there, what is the threat that I am responding to? I keep coming back to that. And I was curious of your thought on that, or would you just put that under the label of it's a fear? It's just a fear. It's something that we think is going to hurt us, a perceived hurt, which is fair. I mean, in any way, in any level, trauma is trauma. But how would you play with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. The threat, I haven't heard the framing of threat, but I'm going to sit with that for a while.
I haven't either. And I can't even tell you why. I can't tell you why that came up, but I found myself wondering, Kevin, this doesn't make sense. This anxiety, what do I,
I will add, so I'll add a layer of complexity perhaps, but maybe it'll help make things clearer. There are three sets of, you can look at the 9 types and break them into 3 sets of 3. So, and part of that, we've been talking a lot about it, right? We talked about body, heart, and head, and that's exactly what the Enneagram represents. 8s, 9s, and 1s are part of the body, the gut, the instinct. 2s, 3s, and 4s are part of the heart center. They're the more emotional, relational types. 5, 6, and 7s are the head center. They're literally in their heads more. And under each of those, so there's the core fear of each of the 9 types, but there's also the shared common unconscious fear that sits right below the surface of awareness for each of the intelligence centers. So for 8s, 9s, and 1s, much of their strategy in life is trying to deal with this often latent unconscious anger. And there's a lot of reasons for why the anger is there. A lot to do with injustices in the world and fairness. 2s, 3s, and 4s, they're all dealing with this latent emotion of shame or sadness. And 5, 6, and 7s, they're all dealing with fear itself. So we all have this core fear, but the head type, the triad that you're part of, the intelligence center of head, have this sort of overdone relationship with fear in general. That's partly why the head types are in their heads, either planning or questioning or trying to process life with their brains, trying to make everything uncertain. Part of what they're afraid of is anything they can't be certain about. So much of the strategies, and 5s do it very differently. 5s go inward and calculate and try to understand things and break things into their component parts to satiate the fear, because they think if they have enough knowledge, they have enough power to overcome the fear and they can mitigate any sense of being overwhelmed by life. 6s spend a lot of time questioning and assessing risks and being, contrarian and all of that to try to finally get to a place of safety and mental relaxation. And 7s go outwards with it, and they try to deal with this sort of fear they have of all the uncertainties of life through constantly planning and moving forward and all the things we've been talking about. So you've got this sort of, you belong to the fear triad, if you will, and then you've got this additional layer of fear according to your type, which is what would happen if I slow down enough? What would, if I really slowed down, what would go on? And I think what I would point you toward, and what I would point anybody toward, is the story, right? What's the story you hold, right? I loved Ian. You mentioned our mutual friend, Ian Morgan-Cron, was on the show. And his book, The Story of You, is a really great one to learn to question. And when I say question, I don't mean like interrogate like a detective. I mean like with compassion and self-friendship to question. Sorry. To question the story. Like, what is the origin story? And I think everybody's is slightly different. For example, sorry, this is just 2 people that I recently spoke to, so this is not a survey. But I talked to, it was in close order to 2 different 7s, 2 different conversations. And each of them shared with me independently. They don't know each other. They weren't part of the same conversation. That their moms, or they had a parent, they should have a parent who was manic depressive. And I'm like, that's really interesting to me. But they talked about a lot of low moments in the house. And that might not be the whole story for them, but in their lived experience, they saw and felt what happened to the whole family when the parent was in this sort of depressive state, right? And again, I don't know, and I'm not a psychologist, but it was interesting. It was part of the narrative they hold up about, I don't ever want to be that. I don't ever want to get down there. I don't ever want to bring that to my lived experience. And again, I'm not suggesting sevens. There's a lot of sevens out there that grew up in a manic depressive household at all. I'm just saying in these two particular separate instances, it was an interesting conversation about the sort of dormant story that might be fueling so much of the behavior of the seven that doesn't want to, because they saw what happened. They saw real lived experience of suffering, and they're like, I don't want that.
Yeah.
And it's very unconscious, but I'm going to keep moving. I'm not going to do that to my family. I'm not going to do that to myself. And so each type, I can talk about it academically according to the Enneagram framework, but I think the invitation is to say, what's the story I'm living out of? And can I change that story now? Is that story serving me? Is it time to step into a new story, as Ian points out in his book?
Well, what's interesting to me as you talk about that, Scott, too, is if I look at that and say, I'm in the fear triad. And if we look at the Enneagram in general and say, gosh, is it just hardwired happenstance, however God created you, whatever, or is there some genetic aspect that I come from an ancestry and some people who there were some things that happened to them that did not happen to me, but that is, we know that's, the studies of research have shown us that those things genetically can get passed through so that I have a propensity to come from fear. And I do want to play with that for a second too, because or to qualify it even, because if you talk about fear, am I a fearful person? Most people in my life would testify to the exact opposite. Oh my gosh, no, man, he's fearless and he takes risks, and he's not. One of my daughters had a boyfriend who was a fireman, and he said, "Your dad's not real safe, is he?" and because I tend to go, okay, sure, on a physical aspect, and I've known that. And I'll pick on guys, guys who go out there and battlefield, fear nothing, but they're not going to sit on their couch and talk about their feelings with their wife, man. They're terrified of that, so. On the physical side, maybe not, and maybe with business and whatever. But you come over here into a mental aspect, and apparently I'm dramatically fearful. So much so that I'm in my awareness, sitting back, going, "What is going on, dude? What are you fearing?" And all I can think about is a physical thing. And there's no physical fear. This is an internal struggle that I'm hardwired in. But I appreciate you pulling this out, because even that thought of maybe I'll never come up with something. Maybe we're not going to do, EMDR sessions and come up with, XYZ really did happen to you, or what? Maybe not. Maybe it's a genetic thing that got passed down and I have a propensity for that. But as you said, so now getting it on the table gives me the opportunity to be aware, be becoming aware, and move beyond and not let it run my life. Because in my ill health, as you talk about time and time again, in my ill health, I have allowed these natural propensities to run my life and lead me in places I did not want to go. Now, in becoming aware, I have the ability to take an active role, would you say, and steer things in a way that is life-giving, not life-taking.
Completely. I think that's a beautiful way to say it. And I'm glad you brought up genetics and epigenetics. Like you said, there's things that happen in our ancestry that, literally change genetic codes, it seems, and we end up living out of this experience. So I think it's a both and. I think we, I don't know if we're born a type or if we're born, I have a theory that in my head, I kind of think maybe we're born into one of the intelligence centers, like we're kind of born a heart type or a head type or a body type, and then maybe lived experience shapes which of those three we become. I don't know. But introspection, self-observation, ultimately, and I mentioned this in the book as well, going back to our earlier conversation, part of the difficulty of developing awareness is that we just become very automated. And, some of that is a result of our brains and their ability to develop habits which allow us to perform tasks without having to think about it, right?
Right.
So we don't spend a lot of time thinking about why we do what we do. We just do it, right? And so there's stimulus and then there's response, right? We have stimulus, we have response. And until we become aware of why we respond the way we respond, we'll just keep acting out of that same conditioning. So what we're talking about is, can we build enough insight, start practicing enough pausing and self-observation before we respond to widen the space between stimulus and response, to get back what you just referred to, which is more agency over our own lives. Yes. So we're not just living out of automatic conditioning.
Well, so let me say on that, again, folks, Scott gave the reference to cpenneagram.com to take it if you haven't. But I'm looking at Amazon, your book, the hardcovers, $40, paperbacks, $20. Go get that. I would pay if I took the CP Enneagram and understood what was in your book as far as the list and the understanding is, okay, here's these 5 areas and how you're going to tend to respond in an unhealthy way and what the goal is in a healthy way. I would pay a lot of money just for those lists. So go get the book and walk through it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go take it again. It's been a little while since I took it. I'm going to go take it again. And then understanding myself and my wings better. I'm not real versed on my wings, actually. And then go through and I literally do kind of a listing out in the 5, again, in the 5 areas, which, I do want to do justice to those. Let me go read into everybody. Self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationships, decision-making, and stress management. So you learn what you are, what Enneagram number you are, what your wings are, and then go in there and you can skip right to those sections in each one. I have the page numbers here for myself. Skip to them and then look and go, this is how you're going to respond in a healthy way and see how you're doing. And then see what the goal is incredibly empowering. And I feel like I need to, if I'm going to go from being made aware to becoming, I'm tempted to list them out and print them out and just put them up like by my home desk or something like that. So that I'm looking at those and I'm getting my daily directive as to be aware. And this is the way you want to err today. The way you want to lean today is into the health. Man, I'm enamored with it. I'm so grateful for the work you've done to bring this to us. Thanks for your time here today. And I'll be following up with you more because I'm gonna dig in and keep having questions. So it's awesome. An honor, Scott. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I loved it.
This is part 1 of this series on emotional intelligence. You can find Scott Allender on your podcast app at The Evolving Leader Podcast. And his new book, again, is titled The Enneagram of Emotional Intelligence, A Journey to Personal and Professional Success. Coming up next, we'll talk about what drives Scott and how he walks out his own pursuit of emotional intelligence. Friends, thank you for tuning into Self-Helpful, where I curate the sea of new personal development materials and help you integrate wisdom into your life, because we all want to elevate our own experience and improve the way we show up for others.